Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Julia. I was an admission officer at Haverford College, an outside reader for Emory University, and I currently work at Milton Academy, an independent boarding and day school outside of Boston, Massachusetts.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a graduate of the University of Georgia, and she is getting her master's degree at North Carolina State University. This week in the news, the truth about college admissions from college admissions deans, an article by Valerie Strauss in the Washington Post. Our question from a listener is part 2 of Diana's question from Wisconsin, where she asks several questions related to the transition from her student to college. Our interview is Karen Kristof, the Dean of Admissions at Colorado College. Karen answers questions about how a college evaluates the high school that applicants are coming from. And our college spotlight will be part 2 of the University of Michigan. But for now, it is our first In the News episode with Julia Esquivel. Julia, how are you?
Good. Thanks for having me, Mark. I'm super excited.
I am so excited because I know how much you help me when we talk. And as you know, the last 5 years, we've become friends, and it's fun doing a podcast with your friends. So our listeners got a good taste of someone else on your team, and Rod was on last month, and everybody loved Rod, so of course they're going to love Julia. Why not, right?
Yeah, I steal a lot of his lines anyways.
I would steal his lines too if I worked with Rod.
They're good.
Awesome. Well, let's get into our admissions tip. When you are having somebody read your personal statement, and whoever that is, it could be your school counselor, it could be your independent counselor, your CBO counselor, or a parent or older sibling, whoever it is, have them mark a spot where your essay is either boring or confusing. It's very helpful to get that fresh set of eyes to go back and see where did you either lose the person or something wasn't clear. Our admissions vernacular, now this is a term you don't hear that often, but occasionally you hear it, the $1 Million Walk. What is the $1 Million Walk? The college admissions tour. Think about it. We have private schools now at $85,000 a year. Times that by 4, that's $340,000. Throw in inflation, not inflation, but price increases. And all you need to do is have 3 people on the tour, and it really, truly is the $1 Million Walk. In some cases, it's probably the $3 or $5 million walk. So that's a term you'll occasionally hear for the college tour. And our big number is $1.1 billion. And what is that? Well, last month, Stanford announced an eye-catching $1.1 billion gift for a brand new school on climate change and sustainability. It's going to be called the Doerr School of Sustainability. And Stanford leaders say it will accelerate solutions to climate change. Now, who has $1.1 billion to give away? Well, apparently venture capitalist John Doerr and his wife, Ann. Now, this is not the single largest gift in American university tradition. Our regular listeners know that goes to Michael Bloomberg, who gave $1.8 billion to Johns Hopkins in 2018. But it is the second largest gift all time in higher ed philanthropy. And just to put things in perspective, Stanford has now received 8 gifts of over $100 million since 2001, more than any other school in the country. How big is 1.1 billion? Well, it is the largest gift ever to California community colleges was 100 million. So it's $1 billion more than that. A lot of publicity went to Robert Smith when he gave 40 million to Morehouse to help pay student loans off after he gave the commencement speech in 2019. It's 1.06 billion more than that. And the largest gift ever given to the CUNY system in New York is 30 million. So it's 1.07 billion more than that. and it's more than double the largest gift ever given to Harvard. So shout out to the philanthropy for the Door Foundation. We'll start this new school at Stanford, which, by the way, is their first new school in 70 years.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
But we have a great article today. You ready to transition, Julia?
Yeah.
All right. So this article, and it may be familiar to our regular listeners, it's called The Truth About College Admissions from College Admissions Deans by Valerie Strauss of the Washington Post. And it's actually part 2, because Dave and I discussed this back in mid-October, and we said we were going to come back to it because we just scratched the surface. And basically, what Valerie Strauss does is she's assembling some quotes that Brennan Barnard, who, I worked together with for 4 years, and he's been on a podcast multiple times, he assembled by interacting with college admissions deans. And this was actually our most listened to episode by a large margin. So I don't know if it was this or the interview or whatever, but we said at the time we are going to come back and discuss it further. And now that's what I am doing with Julia. And so basically the article has around 20 quotes or so from various admission leaders, just giving their insights and their wisdom to students. And last time we picked 3 or 4 quotes, and we're going to do the same thing again. And so I've asked Julia to pick a couple quotes that popped off the page for her. And I'm going to read the first one. And Julia, I want you to just say whatever comes to your mind. What made you pick this quote? Does that work?
Deal.
All right. So this one is from Mike Sexton, Vice President for Enrollment Management at Santa Clara University. And it says, "No one is entitled to enroll at the selective institution of their choice. Your hard work and ability increase your college options, but not your ability to choose exactly where you will go. It is a process where you can do absolutely everything right and not get what you want. For some students and parents, it's the first time that happens." Julia, what do you want to say about this quote?
This quote really stood out to me, particularly in this admission cycle that I just went through. So I work with really well-resourced students at a really well-resourced high school. And I think we saw more no's than we ever have before. And I was really struck by my students and honestly their parents' inability to really wrap their head around that. And so I think what really stuck out to me about this quote is the word entitled, and also the part of the sentence about your ability and your hard work increases your chances, but not your ability to choose exactly what college you go to. And as I was watching students sort of struggle with their no's, the first thing that they think is, oh, I must be wildly inappropriate of an applicant. They said, no, they don't like me. They must have not liked this about me or that. And it's true. This quote, these students actually did everything right. They might have had perfect grades, perfect transcript, great essays. They did a lot of extracurriculars, and they got a no. And their inability to understand what that no meant and to still feel valued and feel like they put in a good application was really hampered. And I noticed a lot of that came from maybe us as counselors not really working with students who this was maybe their first sense of adversity in their life. Like very lucky, very privileged, but it might have been the first time they were ever told no before. And I think this is where the "it takes a village" model is really important, because we who journey with students through this process need to take responsibility in modeling good behavior when you hear a no. And so the entitled word in this quote means a lot to me, because I do think students sort of emerge thinking, hey, if I do everything right and I'm a really good student and do everything you tell me to, I should have one of these spots, right? These spots are not meant or saved for certain people. They're not there for the taking. And I think parents especially can do a really good job while going through this process and modeling that it is not there for their student. Yes, the student has to earn that spot, but even if you did everything to earn that spot, you might not get it. And it's not the end of the world. It's not an indictment on you. And it's certainly not something to talk about other people. What I saw a lot this year were a lot of parents had an inability to sort of understand the no's themselves and started grasping at all of these reasons. Oh, that student must have done this, or how did that student get it but not mine, or where did your child get in? Why didn't mine do as well? And all that my students were hearing from these parents is, oh, I must not have measured up. I must have failed somewhere. Oh, this was my spot. What went wrong? What happened? And no good conversation was happening about sort of, this is your news, this is your answer. Now, what do we do with the yeses that we have, and how do we still emerge as a person of who has confidence and value? My colleague Terry James Solomon always says she wants students to leave the college process whole, because there will be ups and downs. It's great when it's all up, but most of the time there's a lot of downs in selective college admissions. And I think we can do a better job as the adults surrounding students in this and teaching them that it's not something that is guaranteed for them, that a yes or admission is not the main metric of success, that you won't be an embarrassment to yourself or to your family if you don't get these spots that you think you're entitled to. So I'm really hoping that people can understand this and really realize you can do everything right, and you can really be a wonderful applicant. And just because you get no does not mean something was wrong, but it also means this is your moment to learn about resilience and your moment to learn about your spot in terms of all of the privilege you might have and resources you have, and all of those resources that might exist at a different school that you did get into. So I really do hope that the adults in students' lives can really hear this quote and realize that it's not about a spot that's been saved for you that you just got to slip right into. And also what happens when you don't get that spot. And we can model for students much better about how to deal with maybe the first no that they'll ever experience.
No, well said. And I really am always looking for ways to try to help people to understand that there are certain schools that are, as somebody dubbed, reach for alls. They really are. I don't care who you are. They are a reach. And maybe you're a strong enough applicant that you should apply, but you cannot expect to get in. And I was reading earlier today a quote from one favorite authors on the college admission process, Rebecca Sapke, at Dartmouth, who wrote a fantastic admissions book that we featured a few weeks ago on our podcast. But she has this quote where she basically says that a lot of times the denials and the accepts are virtually indistinguishable in terms of how strong they are as an applicant. It's just what met our needs as an institution.
Right.
And I say that maybe that can comfort people to know that, okay, I know the denial is harsh, but you might have been really, really close. You really might have been. There may be absolutely nothing wrong with your profile. And I find most students have very top heavy lists. And so anything we can do, and Julia, you and I have these conversations a lot. And so now we'll just be like letting everybody else in on our conversations as we try to sharpen each other's skills and learn to be more effective at helping families in this process. But you want to move on to the next one?
Sure.
So this comes from Heath Einstein, Dean of Admission at TCU Texas Christian. And later on in the year, Julia and I will both be interviewing Heath. So we're really excited about that. We already got a date on the calendar. And actually, why don't you give a little bit of intro of you knew Heath way back before he was at TCU. Why don't you share that, Julia?
Yes. So I met Heath when I was, it must have been fall of 2010 or 2011. And I had Dallas as my recruitment territory when I worked at Haverford College. and I walked into Hockaday, which is a independent school for girls in outside of Dallas. And Heath was the college counselor that I met with. And one of my funny stories about Heath is I was like, Heath Einstein and Hockaday and Dallas. And he asked me what other schools I had been at. And I had mentioned the other schools I had visited. And he's like, oh, I know this student there and that student there. And I was like, oh, wow, Dallas is a pretty big area. Then went to Dallas. The independent schools in Dallas have a large college fair in the fall. And there was Heath. And of course, he knew all these students from all these other independent schools in the area. And I was just so struck that he could know so many people in such a large area. And a lot of it was that there's not that many Jewish folks in the area. So he's sort of been, he's sort of been people's people in his work in Dallas and in Texas. And it made me really inspired to think about the work of what a college counselor can do. Is I was always just thinking a college counselor sort of, help students apply to college. That's it. Maybe, gets involved in the school in some way. But it was clear that Heath had an interest in community and connection, no matter at what level, even if it wasn't college related. And it might have been faith-based and cultural-based at that time. But I was just really struck by how friendly he was, how warm he was, and that clearly was a trusted person, even outside of his own cultural and faith group.
Yeah, and I've never met Heath yet. I'm very excited to. Obviously, I had email exchanges setting up the interview, and I'm really excited to have this interview with him because I have had a chance to hear him speak quite a few times. He actually does Facebook Lives that are recorded on YouTube, and I heard him on another podcast, and I'm very impressed with his transparency.
Yes.
And you can tell that he's trying to help students. He sees himself in that role of, obviously he works for his institution and he needs to take care of his institution, but you can just tell if you listen to him that he's in the business to help students. And it didn't surprise me at all to learn that he had been on the counseling side. And I lived in Dallas for 7.5 years, so I know Hockaday quite well. But this is a great quote from Heath. Let's read it and discuss it. Much of the admission decision rests on factors beyond the student's control by the time the application is submitted. So what was it that resonated with you about this quote, Julia?
I think it dovetails really nicely with that first quote and very much what you just mentioned, Mark, where that you could have by the numbers and checking all the boxes, a perfect application, and you might still get denied. And that's just simply because of institutional priorities at the college. Since I'm located in Boston, Massachusetts, I think you could probably guess the 10 most popular schools that our students apply to. And because they're so popular, there's an oversaturation of students applying from independent schools in the New England area. And there's just simply not enough space to honor all of those students. It's not a meritocracy, unfortunately, the admissions process. And so when a college is trying to shape their class, it doesn't mean that you wouldn't have been a great person to add to that. It just means that there's just simply not space for you, and maybe there's space for someone who's very similar to you, but also plays the tuba, and the orchestra just graduated their tuba player. We actually see this a lot with our students who Bowdoin might be a really exciting school for them. And on paper, actually, they're really good fits for something like a Claremont McKenna or a Pitzer, one of the Claremont colleges. And they're just going to run up against less roadblocks by applying to those schools than they might to another school. So sometimes it's really hard to, especially the last quote we just talked about doing everything right. My second least favorite conversation is for the really strong student who's also a really lovely human being, where I have no good answers as to why the student did not get into really selective places, except to know that I trust the admissions process. I've been on that side and I've seen that. And to know that if everyone's special, no one's special, right?
Mhm.
So you could have done everything right, but you're just overrepresented in the pool. It could also come down to other institutional priorities. We do a lot of athletic recruitment. For example, I'm at a prep school in New England. So you can imagine we have a decent amount of squash players and sailors and field hockey players. And some of the schools got rid of those programs right when our students were sort of going through the process. And that's a really good example. For whatever reason, Stanford said, you know what? We're not going to really recruit for a field hockey team and have a varsity field hockey team. And that student who might have gotten in because they could contribute to the field hockey program no longer can. And it didn't mean that they weren't good enough to go to Stanford. It didn't mean that they wouldn't do well at Stanford if they got in. It's just that they were just another really strong student who had really strong leadership and extracurricular. There just wasn't anything else that was particularly compelling to the college that said, we've got space for you as well. So I just think it's really important to talk about the institutional priorities, and it's especially important as well when you're writing those supplements for colleges. That's what I try to teach our students, is that if you're writing a supplement about why X college, and I could actually extract the college name and put in another peer institution and it still rings true, that's not a very strong supplement. But that also goes to show you, like, yes, they have very strong academics. They have great professors. They have great research. Most students applying to college are hoping for great professors and great academics. So if there's not something particularly compelling on top of your strong application into these schools, it doesn't mean you're an inappropriate applicant. It's just that compelling piece that might be missing is an institutional priority that you're not able to fill, or you're overrepresentative in the pool, and therefore there's just not enough room for all the strong students to get a yes.
Yeah, you know what I find challenging, and obviously, Julie and I, we've talked about this in our conversations. It's just really challenging striking that balance between trying to let people know what the numbers look like, how few spots are there compared to the tens of thousands of applications. Trying to give the people a dose of reality there without just completely deflating them. And striking that balance is just really tricky, because if I come on too hard, I had a family in Maryland tell me the other day, like, you've told me this for like the millionth time. It was clear, like, I don't need to hear you say it again. It was clearly the tone. But I just felt the list was just so super top heavy.
Right.
And I could tell there was a disconnect. And so I'm always someone I would rather you take your medicine now and than just be completely startled later. And the numbers, like, I'll say on the podcast, I've said this many times, 43,000 high schools for some schools taking 2,000 spots. Well, that doesn't even begin to paint the picture. That's bad in and of enough, right? Like, that would be basically every 22 schools getting one kid in. But that doesn't count all of the students that get special consideration. Like you said, athletes, tuba player, and many, many other things, which we've talked about a lot before in the podcast. What about international students?
Mm-hmm.
The international students, they apply to these most selective schools, and there is incredible talent in other places in the world. And so I think part of it, though, is I think sometimes if people really can see what the numbers are like, while it may be a little discouraging, at least I think it helps them to frame it and lower their expectations. And I like to try using examples, like, for example, like, let's say you found out Beyonce was giving a free concert in your area and only 50 people got in and they announced it. Well, there's a good chance people will be like, well, I'm probably not going to be one of the 50. Like, the spots are so limited because they have a sense of, I know how many people are going to want that spot. But it seems like when it comes to college admissions, people are kind of in their own little echo chamber. They think of themselves in the own context of their own school, And they're like, well, I'm a superstar in my own school. Yeah, what about 43,000 more plus international? Plus, as you know, most of the kids that get into these places are coming in with some hook.
Right.
And so I think that's part of it. And once again, this isn't to be discouraging or deflating. It's to help people to properly expectation set. Because what happens is when you fixate so much on these plan A, you can lose out on some amazing plan Bs or plan Cs.
Absolutely.
All right. So now we're going to go to another one of my favorite people in college admissions. In fact, we'll be having lunch in 3 days together. So I was glad you picked this quote because he reminds me a lot of Heath in his transparency and his great ability to communicate complex truths in a realistic way. And that's Rick Clark. So let me read this quote and then you can tell me what made this one pop for you. Families should be more focused on the rooms they walk into every day. Example, their kitchens, their living rooms, their classrooms, than admissions committee rooms that they will never enter. Admissions decisions are not fair. They are neither a value judgment, an assessment of parenting acumen, or a prediction of future success. I like that so much I got to read it again. It was really good. Families should be more focused on the rooms they walk into every day. Example, their kitchens, their living rooms, classrooms, than an admissions committee room they will never enter. Admission decisions are not fair. They are neither a value judgment, an assessment of parenting acumen, or a prediction of future success. And that's from Rick Clark, undergraduate admissions dean of Georgia Tech. And he just got one of those promotions, VP, blah, blah, and all that. Well-deserved, Rick. So your thoughts on this one, Julia?
This quote, as many by Rick, is just perfect, especially for, as I alluded to earlier, sort of the doldrums of the end of admissions decision season. It reminds me actually of one student I had who graduated high school in 2019, and she had a good list. She was a very good student, and she kind of just missed at those uber selective places. And she landed at a place that is still very selective, but was not on her radar because she had invested a lot of time in these very selective places. And it took just 6 months for her she graduated, she had summer, and then she had basically up until Thanksgiving break that she just got freed from all of that pressure and stress and started to realize, I spent a lot of time worrying about the name of the school, and I missed out on a lot of the end of my senior year being a little obsessed with the wrong things. And she comes back and talks to our students who are also maybe dealing with disappointment. And it took her 6 months, but I would say most of my students who don't love their choices and then end up depositing somewhere, going for a semester, they ended up not transferring. They come back to me, and usually in less than a year's time, they're able to kind of extricate themselves from the feeling that they were feeling about the name, and they start to realize that has nothing to do with my value. And I just invested so much time in my high school community that I would rather be remembered for how I showed up and showed out in the classroom, for my friends, for my field hockey team, for the DEIJ workshop. That was more important to them, and that's what they remember, rather than these kind of truncated maybe month of just dealing with disappointment or even highlights. I've had students who maybe do get into one of these very selective schools and they're miserable. And they feel like they missed out on things in high school. And also they were not building the things that actually make them who they are. there's also a lot of research out there that suggests the name of the college is not likely to change your trajectory. Especially the students I work with are mostly so well resourced and connected. Like they could probably never go to college and still get a job on Wall Street if they wanted it. They could still go into the workforce and do X, Y, and Z. And in fact, we're seeing now, especially for low income folks and BIPOC students, is that actually minority serving institutions, which are usually less selective, show more economic mobility and social capital. So those sort of measures of success than maybe some of these brand name schools. I think what this quote also points out is that selectivity is not synonymous with value, right? That just because a place is really selective doesn't mean that they say no to you, it doesn't mean you're not smart, you're not of value, you don't contribute in X, Y, and Z ways. And in life, when I think back on all these years, you're not really going to think about the name of the college you went to. You're going to think about your best friend's wedding you went to, or when you got married, maybe when you had a child. There's all these other ways that it's more important to show up in this world than just the name of the college that you get into. I always like Deb Shaver, former dean of admissions at Smith College.
She's been on our podcast. She was great.
Yes, she always used to come talk to our parents, and it was great. And she would say to them, if everything I'm telling you about fit and match, and she used to always quote Theodore Roosevelt too, that comparison is the thief of joy, right? If you keep thinking about, oh, why didn't you get that or this, or why can you be like that? That if you really can't look past that, you can just go to the college bookstore and for $2 purchase that bumper sticker, and you could just slap it on your car. No one asks if you actually went there. So if that matters so much to you, I'd rather you did that than think about the name of the school. And really important in this quote is that because selectivity is not a measure of somebody's value, we have to realize that admissions decisions and the admissions process is just inherently not fair, right? It's not a meritocracy, or as Jess Lord, my former boss and dean of admissions at Haverford College, would say, admissions is not about just desserts. And I do think we maybe have framed that, or that is the understanding in young people. So really setting the stage about how it's not fair, how selectivity is not synonymous with your value, I think is really important. And it allows students to focus on really growing and developing into good humans. And part of the college process is getting to know who you are. That's more the important part of the process than your outcomes.
Yeah, there's a lot you said there, Julia, that I love. One of the things you talked about, how once people go to their school, they often have a different perspective. And some of that is because they realize that the other place they ended up is really, really good. Like they might not have thought it was that great. Maybe it wasn't as prestigious or ranked as high or whatever. But when they get there, they realize this place is actually really good. And look at the opportunities that abound. I see that a lot with students that I work with.
Yes.
There's so much in this. This quote was great. And this, I tell Rick, he comes on all of our important episodes. So he was on episode 50 here. Then we had him on for 100. I'll have to have him back for 250. But there's so many profound things. Every line in here to me is pretty profound. One of them says, one of the things I love in here, and I'm going to jump to the back half, then I'm going to go to the first half. Talking about admissions decisions. They're not a value judgment. They're not an assessment of parenting acumen, because we know people have a tendency to look at where the kids got in college as a reflection on them doing a good job at parenting. So I'm glad to see him hit that head on. Not a prediction of future success. We know that's true. Read Frank Bruni's book, Where You'll Go Is Not Who You'll Be. I'm going back through it a third time as an audiobook, and I'm getting even way more out of it again. But everybody needs to read that book. Have you read that book, Julia?
Yes.
It just makes this case, right? Example after example after example. And then this is a part I really like, even that it's pretty direct and pretty harsh, but it's so true. Families need to focus more on the rooms they walk into every day. So in other words, you have control of how you act in your kitchen, how you act in your living room, how you act in your classroom. We could extend that to the playing fields, the library, and we could go on and on. It's another way of putting this is focus on things that you have control over, not the things you don't have control over. And it'll just lead to a happier life. So I really, really like these quotes, and they're all designed to be pearls of wisdom from seasoned admission vets to decrease your stress, to put you in the right mindset, the right frame of mind. Because, Julie, I know you talked earlier, there was a fair amount of disappointment coming off the admission cycle. I can just say that's true everywhere. I network with a lot of people, and it's the same thing you heard everywhere. You and I are in a college counselor group. I'm in another college counselor group of 20 counselors, and we did a recap meeting, and this is what everybody was saying. They were all saying this year was brutal.
Mm-hmm.
And once again, there's somebody who's going to hear that and say, you're stressing me out. What I want people to hear is I got to have a really good plan B and plan C. I've shared this story before, but I'm going to say it again on the podcast. I was working with a student when I was at Westtown. It was like maybe 03, 04. And she liked Brown a lot. She early decision to Brown. But I tried to work with her the whole idea of loving all your list. So she never got in Brown. And I got the news, and I sort of thought, okay, time to put that other counselor hat on that we have to do, Julia. Go to the consoler in chief. And I started going into that, and she, like, this is a paraphrase, but she basically was like, what are you doing? I have like 9 more schools I'm still waiting on. You told me to love all my list. Like, like I'm over that. And I just thought, wow, like that's the mind space that you want to put yourself in. You want to be like the batter going up to the plate, knowing that you have 12 pitches if you applied to 12 schools, or 14 or whatever, or 10, whatever you did. And so what if the first one is a strike or it's a foul ball? You still have a whole lot of more pitches coming your way. And if you can put yourself in that mind space, it'll take so much of the stress out of the process. And so that's what I wanted to say. Any final thoughts on anything, Julia?
No, just that this was the highlight of my day. So thank you. I'm excited about this.
Well, it was also a highlight of my day. Julie knows I've talked to her for months before about, I was looking forward to having her on the podcast. And your next episode is going to be that gap year one. So we look forward to your insights on the gap year, because Julie and I have been talking a lot about a gap year, and there's an article that came out about a lot of people, not getting in the school of first choice and taking a gap year and to try to get in a more competitive school the following year. And so we'll look forward to getting your insights on that when we have you back next month. But thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate it.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Lisa, you're coming to me from the great city of Asheville.
Yeah, that's right. Now, we're actually like 40 minutes outside Asheville in Old Fort, North Carolina, which is pretty much near to nothing, but very, very beautiful. So it's dark, so you can't see the view out there, but it's a beautiful mountain view with also a view of Lake Lure. So you can't complain about that.
I've probably stayed like almost right there, right on Lake Lure, but you had your first Biltmore experience. Everybody's got to see the Biltmore, don't they?
Yeah, no, it's beautiful and it's amazing. I feel a little depressed sometimes when I go to these uber rich places, because you just see how like some people have like all the furniture and the plumbing, and then the servants don't, and then I start feeling sad.
No need to have any envy. No hating over here.
No, it just seems like, just sort of like a great metaphor for the distribution of wealth in our society. I should say that. True. So,
and I know you'll be at UNC Asheville tomorrow, which I know I've done a college spotlight on that, but I'm going to ask you coming up in the next few weeks just for your impressions.
Oh yeah, and I'm taking Sonia, who is going to be in 9th grade, and Thomas, who is going to be in 5th grade, with me on this. So I'm sure they'll have some impressions too that may or may not be valuable, but will probably be entertaining. So
I guess we're both type, but I started with Karis at the end of 10th, and with Joy, because of the athletic thing, it was 9th. But not everybody has to do that. But if your kid wants to get out and set foot on campuses, then it can be a good thing. So if this is the age and the student likes to do it, then middle school, if they want to do it.
Right.
I'm sure Thomas would probably enjoy it.
Well, he's been to a surprising number of college tours because he went with
Sure.
Lily a lot too. But, my kids kind of don't have a choice because, like, if I go on a couple of college tours, and I can, like, mark off some of this trip as a business deduction.
That's true.
And so I'm like, if you want to go on a trip, you gotta, go on some tours so you can earn your keep on that trip. So
awesome. All right. Well, we are transitioning, and one thing I want to share that admission office may surprise somebody if they were in admissions is a lot of times college fairs frustrate admission officers. They can be frustrating, more so than people might think. And they're frustrating for a lot of reasons. One of the reasons they're frustrating is, the thinking is that if we invested hotel, airfare, rent-a-car, meals to come in here, can you ask me a question that you couldn't got off the brochure? So you get a lot of really bad questions. That's a big reason it's frustrating. Depending on the demand of your school, sometimes you're sitting at a table for a long time and not getting a lot of activity, and it may not feel like, I don't know if this hour and a half was worth my time, plus the commute and everything. That, of course, depends on the fare and the demand of the school and the location and everything. And then a lot of times, for rising seniors, they've kind of already made up their mind a lot of times where they're interested in anyway. And so it's just tough. And so if you listen to my interview with Courtney Minden from Babson, she commented on this, that we've been questioning the value of fares for a long time anyway. So sure, the pandemic hurt, but not now. I don't see them ever going away because they can be very, very valuable. But overall, I would say that people are more frustrated by them than inspired by them. Overall, that might surprise people.
Yeah, no, I can really imagine that because kids, like, a lot of times the first entry into the college search process is their parents or their advisor drags them to a college fair, and they don't know what to look for. It's overwhelming. There's have to talk to grown-ups. I'll never forget one college fair Lily and I went on. She talked to the rep at the University of Redlands. And so Lily's like this kind of person. She's like, give me your elevator pitch. Why should I go to your school? And so this poor rep, she couldn't have been like, more than 23 years old.
Sure.
She's like, well, you can do like things like an internship at Target. And Lily's like, great. How do I get that internship at Target? She's like, well, it's not like it's guaranteed or anything. With the and Lily's like, well, then why did you bring that up as a selling point if it's not something that's
totally... Lily doesn't pull punches. She pull punches.
I thought that girl was going to cry. Probably she took her name down, and Lily has like a big black mark at the University of Redlands now, should she ever fly. But
well, I used to be over recruitment. I was director of recruitment and recruitment strategy. And one thing I learned really quickly is you have to have a multi-pronged approach, especially if it's, sometimes you're just going to a fair that's like 15 or 20 minutes away from your home, but not every time it's hotel, airfare, rent-a-car, meals. But when it is, you can't just come in and just do a fair. Sure, the NACAC fair is something like that. You could do something on that scale, but you have to have a whole approach, right? So you have to combine your fairs with your school visits, with any interviews you may be doing on the road, if you do interviews, with receptions, that you may do, and the different types of receptions. Maybe you do one at a Marriott, and then you do another with an alum. Like, you need to do all, man, you meet with your consultants and your CBOs. Like, you need to have a multi-pronged approach, and that's how you end up having good recruitment travel. Then if you like one of the 5 or 6 or 2 of the 5 or 6 are duds, you had like a six-pronged approach. Six-pronged approach.
Yeah. Well, hopefully that rep from the University of Redlands had other things planned than talking to my kid.
Yeah, that is a funny story. All right. Well, let's transition. We have another set of fantastic questions from Diana from Wisconsin, and I'm excited for us to handle them. So dive in and take it where you want to go, Lisa.
Sure. So the overarching theme of these questions is about transitions to college, the first year of college, and how parents and students should or should not handle those. And so, one, I think, really good question that Diana asked about is what to do about Thanksgiving break. And she says, we found that plane tickets for Thanksgiving break were sky high in price. And the remaining school year after the break was so short, it was almost not worth it to have her come home from break. In retrospect, we kind of wish we had not set the expectation to have her come home for Thanksgiving as it was short and stressful.
Yeah, and every situation is going to be different because, in this situation, you're talking about airfare and a pretty significant commute. And then pricing is all over the place, right? On that piece. So sometimes people catch great prices and great special rates, and then everybody's got different resources and all of that. But in general, I would agree 100% with this. Like, it is very short, like you might get out of there Wednesday, and then you got Thursday, Friday, coming back sometimes Saturday, and the airports can be very busy.
Yeah.
There's a heavy travel time. And then because it's a heavy travel time, prices are generally going to be high. You're not generally going to catch those specials that I talked about because those are on other dates other than Thanksgiving. They have blackout dates for those. So, it's one of these things where you can't sort of prescribe one size fits all because there's so many different variables, right? How far are you away? Does the student really want to come home? There's just a lot of factors involved. But in general, for a long commute and a lot of money, I would agree 100%. Thoughts, Lisa?
Yeah, no, I mean, and I never got to really experience this because I think the first year when Lily went away to college in North Carolina and we were still in Illinois, they sent them home after Thanksgiving because of COVID.
That's
And
true.
now she lives like 45, 50 minutes away and she just shows up at random intervals with like wanting lunch and with a bunch of laundry. So I haven't done that, but I can only imagine that would be hard. I mean, it's kind of hard to think about your kid not being at home on Thanksgiving. And, what if they're lonely or they don't have other friends or they're there? So I guess it would just definitely have to be a real discussion, and really trying to encourage your student to make a lot of other plans with students who are also in the same situation.
I mean, there's generally quite a few offerings on, in the area. First of all, you got all the international students, right? But a lot of people don't come back in general, and not just international students, anybody, a lot of people with a long commute. And so now, if this is first year, is the student plugged into that community, that's there? And then there's other things too. Like, it's not just like a lot of times there might be services through residential life, but there are also services through individual clubs. And if you're involved in like a house of worship, like there's a lot of different people that are doing things. But that doesn't necessarily mean a brand new freshman is already plugged into that, especially if someone's a little bit more introverted. So there are a lot of factors, and you're right. One of the big ones is, does the student want to come home? And then the second one is it in the budget? So it's a great question though. And I think the bottom line is that this would be the takeaway that I would have for everybody. This question reminds me a lot of what I say about all things money, which is there shouldn't be surprises. Like, the most important takeaway here was the line here about setting an expectation. So there shouldn't be a disconnect between what a student is expecting and what a parent can do financially. That should be discussed and agreed upon ahead of time. And so that you're all on the same page. Like, different people will come down differently because of all the factors I've said, right? Different budgets, different distances people are going, different desires on the part of students. Does the student need the break? There's just a lot of factors. But one thing I would definitely agree on is that everybody should be on the same page. And another thing that I would say is a parent should not feel an obligation that the child has to come home. Like, that could be, nowadays prices for airlines are way up too with the gas.
Oh, well, I mean, this summer it's crazy.
It's crazy.
It's insane. I've never seen prices this high in my whole life. So,
and I'm a little salty because, so, we're flying. I got a lot of airfare coming up. Like, I'll be in Colorado, and then I'm going to Minneapolis, and then so for the Minneapolis trip, they want $120 a bag to check for check-in. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But what are you going to do? Now, they've got you.
Oh, well, I tell you what I do, Mark. I can put you in touch with a great carry-on bag, and you will not believe the amount of things you could
You
shove
stuffed
into
it
that
all
thing
in.
and stick it in the overhead. I went to Europe for 2 weeks with my whole family on a choir trip with complete choir attire, and we only had carry-on bags for the entire
Whoa.
thing.
When was this?
This was in 2018, so it can be. This is,
Oh, so
back
this is not Lisa the college student.
No, this is within the before times, right? When people went on trips and did things, but in groups. But yeah, it was it took a lot of planning and a lot of work, but it can be done. That's when I started getting like I just find myself watching like suitcase ads, like I'm like it was like my husband would be like, "Are you watching luggage porn again?" Like to be like,
Oh
"Oh, how
my
much can I
goodness.
fit in there?" So you just
You have
I
some
can hook
strange
you up.
habits in your family.
I think they're all mine. I'm pretty sure they're all mine. But yeah, packing light is a skill. You can learn how to do it because who wants to pay that money?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I just figured it is what it is. All right, let's go on to
Well,
another one.
I could do that. Another way to go.
Yeah, let's go on to the next question.
All right. So Diana asked about safety and crime on campus. Does a campus have an emergency alert system that students can sign up for text alerts? Can parents sign up also?
How does that work at Elon?
Oh my goodness, they are so good. They are tech. I mean, I literally that's how I know if a thunderstorm's coming my way because I'll get like a text, lightning strike, lightning in the area, severe storm warning, like rain, snow, sleet, hail, and then just any kind of parking thing or anything. They keep us all very much in the loop. So Lily gets it, her dad and I get it. So
I find that's the most common. Obviously, there's a range. You can never. Once again, these are different schools. They all have different policies. But one thing they all know is that safety is a major, major, major concern for every parent, especially every mom, but dads and daughters too. And so there are a lot of tough questions. I remember when Joy was going through orientation, in the summer, and it was supposed to end at a certain time. But they said, we'll stay here until we answer all your questions. And it was question after question after question after question about safety and security.
mm-hmm.
It really was. And so this is something that everybody's cognizant of. And normally the answer is yes to this. But I would tell anybody you have to check out your own individual institution and see what their policies are. But you'd be crazy to not, appease isn't the right word, satisfy, and allay is a better word, allay parents' concerns when it comes to anything to do with safety and crime. Yeah, I like allay better than appease. Appease has a sort of condescending aura about it.
Right, because it's a reasonable fear. Now,
Yeah.
I mean, I know that some schools do more than others. I mean, I went
Correct.
to like a scholarship weekend at Florida Southern, and there was like the students were off doing their interviews, and they had a parent session, and all these parents wanted to know about safety. And at Florida Southern, they give the students these little like key fobs or something, and you push a button or it gets dropped, or you do something like 50 policemen like immediately surround you. Your parents are alerted. It's like this whole thing. And that people really like that. I kind of thought if I were a kid, that would sort of freak me out. I know I would like put it at the bottom of my purse and it would go off and, my parents would be worried that I was dead or something like that. But I mean, that was a big concern with that crowd of safety, and they love the idea of this fob that protects them from everything.
It's funny, I've been to that campus quite a few times, maybe like 5. In fact, for a while they were recruiting Joy for basketball, so we had recruitment trips there, and then she would have tournaments there all the time in AAU. And Lakeland is really safe. That's a safe
I know that's
area.
the thing that I felt like such a jerk. I'm like, I'm not totally worried about my kid at all. And this campus is really safe and it's really cute, small town. I don't know.
I like the town.
Birds were a little menacing, but that's the only thing I could say. So.
But I thought of something, a good point. So of course my mind frame is in the mindset of like somebody that has a student already at the campus. But I just had a thought, like, it's a really good thing for prospective parents to take note of the different policies that schools have when it comes to safety and crime. Because things like that are oftentimes a reflection of the culture.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just what you learn. I mean, what you learn about crime and safety in of itself is valuable. but you also get insights into the culture too that I
Right,
think are
right.
important. Awesome. Well, let's go to the next one.
Sure. This one is about communication. And Diana asks, how often should we talk on the phone together? Should we have a weekly call? How often will we be in touch with each other? At this point, we have muddled through these things pretty much, so we kind of figured it out, but the transition was not easy finding our way with these topics. To make it worse, the parent Facebook group was pretty polarized, with parents who seemed to text practically daily with their students and parents who were totally hands off and very judgmental towards parents who were involved in their kids' lives.
Boy, doesn't that sound what we've been talking about? Like different parenting styles, laissez-faire, play to whatever word they're using, snowplow, whatever, can't keep track of it these days, helicopter, whatever. So you'd expect a range of reactions. And I have found this is something that all kinds of different, you can't prescribe this because I've seen all kinds of different arrangements when it comes to this from kids and parents. I've seen the once a week to like texting through the week, but the Sunday at 8:30 is our talk time, to not a designated time, to I've just seen everything. Like, I know some people probably think this is unhealthy, but I can think of one family I worked with where literally like the mom and the daughter were like best friends and they talked constantly, like multiple times a day. And it wasn't like the kid was saying, "Get out of here, mom." Like, I don't think that was the best for probably cultivating independence, but I try not to be too critical of different parenting styles. Different things work differently for different people. So the biggest thing that I would say on this is that you come to an agreement so that there's an understanding. I really am not comfortable suggesting a certain number of times as working, because I really just have found that there's so many different types of relationships that parents and kids have. What are your thoughts, Lisa?
Absolutely. I really think it's so dependent on, just the relationship between that child and their parents and also what that child needs. Some kids need more support at different times than others. Some kids need more independence. And so that's why, I do see this a lot on Facebook and parents groups, or, somebody has a viewpoint and if somebody else is doing something different, they feel compelled to comment upon that. And I just kind of wish people wouldn't do that, because you're only just getting a slice of what that situation is. And, I don't know.
Everybody's macho when they're behind a keyboard and they don't have to talk face to face to somebody.
Yeah. And I just, because, my father would always say, you can't judge other people because you never know what's going on in their lives. And so, I just try to keep if that's what that family wants to do, it's not my business to say anything either way. And there's so many different kinds of configurations of parental relationships and kid relationships that work. There's like a million different ways to have a great relationship. So it's very personal.
Yeah, we do agree. The one thing I would say is, it is our job to prepare kids to independently go out into the world and to learn to kind of live without us.
Yes.
So I do think it's good to sort of wean off of dependency and codependency type of things. That's part of preparation. And that can be really hard. Like, that can be extremely hard for a parent whose whole entire life has been centered around a kid. And now the kid is gone and they're just completely discombobulated. So that can be really hard. But I do believe as a goal, it should be a goal for parents to work toward weaning kids off of dependencies. But I still say that and agree with everything you said about different types of relationships and styles and approaches and cultures, and not judging. So, both of those things can be true without them being in conflicting with one another.
Yeah. And you just have to remember that, people develop maturity at different rates. Some people are like mature, I think, from the moment they're born, and like you could probably send them to college at 4 and they'd be handling it just fine. And other people, it takes them a little longer, and I don't think you want to just throw a kid in the pool, and they don't know how to swim, because they'll fail. But I do think that gradual withdrawal of support, as the child can handle more and more, I think that's definitely warranted. You can't just do things the same way you always did. You have to, keep trying to foster independence as much as you can.
Yeah, and the other thing, I like something you said last week when we were talking about like how often do you take grades and check grades, and you had talked about you sort of take your cues from Lily when she reaches out and she needs you. Like, I think that the student should be the one sort of driving this more and establishing like what's comfortable for them
Right.
is important. Now, I also don't have a problem with the parents saying like if I'm I'm investing in you, like I don't want to just be an ATM. The only time I ever hear about you is money, and I also think that that's fair. So, it's just about striking a balance and knowing your own individual situation.
Absolutely. And listening to your kid too, because I think that's really important. If you don't take their cues, that maybe they're ready to have a little bit more separation, or conversely that they're having a little bit of a hard time and need a little more support at that moment. And I mean, it's not just all one way all the time. You got to kind of move it back and forth as needed.
Yep. No, words of wisdom, pearls of wisdom.
You know me.
I know you're going to give your opinion no matter what. Most of the time I agree with it.
Wow. I don't know if that's a compliment or not, but anyway, thank you.
Backhanded one.
Uh-huh.
No, it is. I'm just having some fun. Thank you, Diana.
Thank you, Diana.
Friends, this concludes the second part. We hope you'll join us next week for the final part.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, last week you heard the first part of our interview. Now it's time for the second part. All right, Karen, let's just dive right in. A very common question that we're frequently asked is, how do selective colleges evaluate my high school? Take some time and share your experience. And, you can use CC, but you can also draw off the other experiences you've had at your other institutions as well.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Such a great question. And I think I'll give you what I've heard is sort of the myth about how admission officers do that. And then I'll try to give you sort of the reality of what actually happens. I think there's some thought that maybe there's a book or a website or something we can go to and we could be like, oh, that high school, let me find out what their rating is, right? In fact, we don't do that, right? We're not really interested in where does this school rank on some kind of a national or international
or something.
Right, exactly. That's right. How many stars do they get from their students, right? But that one of the documents that's incredibly important to us is the school profile. So, I think many of us, when we've been doing this work for a long time, get to know high schools, but I still think it's important that you look at the school profile, right? And so what's a school profile? So I would encourage your listeners, if they haven't seen their school profile, that they should, or their child's school profile, they should take a look at it, right? And I think about the school profile as the document that if I have never heard of your high school, this 1 to 4, hopefully not more than 4, but sometimes 5-page document is going to give me a sense for where, describe this school, describe the community, give me some statistics on what % of students go to college. Maybe you'll provide a list of colleges that students go to, maybe you won't. But most importantly, you'll answer that question of what's available to the student. What is the curriculum? What are the ways in which students progress through particular academic areas? So, what's the English department like across 4 years of high school? What are the options in social sciences? What are the options in science? So I'm using that document to help inform how I'm looking at the transcript, right? So if my expectation, for instance, is I'd love to see most of the applicants get to calculus, do they even have calculus at that high school, right? So what is the terminal most rigorous class in each particular area? And are there particular things that I should be aware of, right? Are there particular things that are happening at the school? Are there particular nuances about how students progress through things? Or,
Can you give some examples? Because I think that
yeah,
will concretize
yeah.
it for our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I worked at Smith College, one of the high schools that we got a lot of applications from, the AP Chem teacher left in the fall and they couldn't replace that person, right? And so those students had to choose another class, generally a lower level class, and they did not do very well on the AP Chem exam, but partially because they missed out on 3/4 of the year. Or let's say that there is often in smaller high schools, it may be that we just don't offer the highest level of English because we didn't have enough interest. Or I don't know if you've ever seen the sort of schools where the AP classes that a student, or honors or advanced classes or IB classes the student may take senior year, many of them are offered in the same time frame. And so the student has to make these difficult choices. Do I take AP Calc BC, or do I take AP Computer Science, or do I take AP Physics, right? Just as an example. So that it's really important that we never want to disadvantage a student by making an assumption about what is or isn't there on a transcript. I think small high schools present, that challenge in spades, right? That, there might be 50 students in the senior class, right? Or there might be 1,000 students in the senior class, and the competition for spaces in the most advanced classes might be particularly vigorous. Or some schools put caps on the number of honors, advanced, IB, AP classes that a student takes. So again, I could guess and I might get it right, but I might get it really wrong. And so really leaning on that school profile to get to know the high school. I think there's this sense that we only admit, or institutions only admit students from particular high schools, and or that there's a quota from a high school.
Sure.
Okay, so high school down the street, you've admitted this many students over the years. I once did this analysis for a high school that literally was down the road 1 mile from the place where I worked. And so typically 10 to 12 applicants a year. And the admit rate went from 28% to 82% over a 5-year period. And it wasn't that suddenly we had a significantly different sort of orientation toward that particular high school. But the year that it was 82%, we had some of their best students, really talented, really incredible students that we wanted to have on our campus. And the year that it was 28, we had less compelling, fewer students who were in sort of the academic profile of a highly competitive institution. So,
that's great. I'm glad you shared that, because that's a frequent question we do get. Is they've already taken 2 kids. So and such school's already taken 2 kids, maybe from athletics or in the early or ED.
Right,
Am I going to be disadvantaged? And so, or 3 kids or whatever. So I'm glad you addressed that. What about the student that is not at a very good school?
Yeah.
But they could be a diamond in the rough. So how do you strike the balance between not adversely hurting their chances, because in all likelihood they didn't pick this school, right? And it's just maybe what's available, or their parents made that choice or whatever. But at the same time, there are not a lot of indicators that you have using traditional metrics that this school has the rigor or the preparation that you see at some of the schools that maybe there's a long-standing track record of sending students to your school who have done well. Like, how do you strike the balance between wanting to admit a kid that's prepared to do the work, but not wanting to punish them because they weren't in a school that was as advantaged as another school across another part of town?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it is threading a very thin needle, right? It is really trying to understand the student in context, right? That the piece of really knowing what this school is. And you're right, students often don't have choices, or they don't have choices that their counselor has 500 students in his or her
Sure.
caseload and can't write the kind of letter that you could if there were 20 students in the caseload or were an independent school. So it's interesting because I think what we try to do, and every office tries to do, so this has certainly been true of the 5 admission offices I've worked at, and certainly something I care about as I work with younger staff and get them into the mindset of how to read, is you have to read in context. You can't go into it with particular assumptions about what the student should or shouldn't do. And there will be, I'll be very honest with you, there will be some high schools where even the top student may struggle at an institution. And so I think that's where we also lean on our colleagues across a college campus to say, okay, we want to admit this student. We know we have these kinds of supported resources for a student. For instance, the student that really didn't have choices. Everything was sort of college prep. And you begin to ask yourselves, we begin to ask ourselves on the committee, is this a student who's ready? Has there been enough challenging material, enough opportunity for a student to meet this in a significant way that we can suggest that this person will be successful? So we can go back, and that's one of the advantages of a small liberal arts college. I would know who to talk to across campus to say, we took this particular student from the school. We were concerned about the preparation. But I think one of the ways to think about this is there is underprepared but incredibly bright. And I think that's one of the ways we need to think about these students, that they didn't have the same opportunities. They didn't have the same access. But what can we learn about them as individuals that might help us understand what might happen to them when more challenging material is thrown at them, when they're in a classroom where the expectations are higher? We see a lot of our first generation students, for instance, saying, I didn't have access to that fancy summer program. I haven't read as much as this person sitting next to me in, this, Shakespeare class, right? But are you somebody who knows how to do that? Do you have a set of skills that will allow you to be successful when the material is harder? So under-resourced schools might have students that haven't had the same access, but these are students that are, I'm going to go back to my Massachusetts days, wicked smart, right? They are students who bring a lot to the table, and you have the sense in they're leveraging every opportunity they can, even if the opportunities are limited, to grow and to develop. Those are often the students that might find the local community college if there's nothing more that they can do. They might find a summer enrichment program through a community-based organization or through a local college, right? That they are doing everything they can to prepare themselves well. And that the qualities, right? This is probably the part of the admission process that is hardest, right? But you get the sense as you read the application that this is a student that will know how to meet a challenge. A setback just encourages them to work twice as hard. And you can tell this, right, in an application. Those are not students I worry about, right? Those are students that have the chops, right? We just need to present the challenging material to them and be ready to support them, right? So maybe you haven't read as deeply in Shakespeare, but boy, you have a real knack in the chemistry lab, and help them to understand that. Often these are students that might say, hey, I want to be a doctor or a lawyer because that's what I need to do to sort of bring myself and my family along, right? And they may not be a good doctor or a good lawyer, right? But there are other ways to think about what are the things that they're good at and how they shape an experience in college that will allow them to be successful. So, I think part of it is, I don't know, maybe I'm getting a little bit far from the whole school quality thing, but I would want to think there would be very few schools that I wouldn't want to have a student at that a student come to Colorado College, right? That we've done a thorough enough vetting process through the admission lens, and that we've tried to identify qualities of resilience and qualities of perseverance and overcoming challenges that really put a student in a good position to be successful. Again, based on our best guess and what we see.
Sure.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Friends, one of the big developments I've noticed in our practice of college counseling is the increase in requests to look at Canadian universities. And there are a lot of reasons for this. Some of it is the political climate, marching on Charlottesville, Jews will not replace us, storming the Capitol, people being repulsed by the whole MAGA movement. Some of it is cost. There's some significant financial savings looking at Canadian universities. Some of it is guns and school shootings, which happen, far, 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 far more frequently in the United States than in Canada. And then some of it is just sort of an adventuresome spirit to want to get out and try something different. Friends, we've recommended some sources for research for Canadian universities in the past. But in my opinion, this is probably the best one. And the website is universitystudy.ca. That's universitystudy.ca. It's our recommended resource for episode 231. You can search universities by name, by province. You can compare universities. You can search by program. Just a lot of real good information and not a lot of opinion, more strictly the facts. So our recommended resource for episode 231 is the website universitystudy.ca. We will now resume my interview with Karen Kristof. What about, Karen, to what extent do you look at data from how students from particular schools have done at Colorado College? Or have you seen that used at any of the other institutions where you've been at, where I know of some colleges, in a small number, that sort of build profiles. And I mean, it works a lot better when you get large numbers of students from the same school or a large number of kids, but you sort of say, okay, the average student from this school has come in and their 3.9 became a 3.3 here, or at this school, the 3.6 was a 3.4. Or like, to what extent have you seen I won't say objective, but analytical models that are used as opposed to just sort of the anecdotal database that you develop when you've been reading for a long time? Have you seen both used? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think often the ability to share data across campus is limited by some confidentiality, right? That I would not want to know. I would be careful of wanting to know exact students' GPA. But for instance, and I'll take my experience at Smith because, I've only been at Colorado College for about a year and a half. But in my 20 years at Smith, I think you would begin to understand particular patterns of achievement and it might be a particular kind of student. So let's say a student who was homeschooled or a student who went to a high school where there was greater adversity and fewer opportunities to advance. What did we know about those students, right? So some of the qualities, to be honest with you, some of the qualities that I just described, I learned at my time at Smith, right? I learned that those skills of resilience, those skills of asking for help, those skills of being able to identify areas where you could grow are really important. I don't know that anybody is doing strict data analysis in that way. I think some institutions do, and some institutions are, reflecting back. Here's where the first year GPA was. Here's what you saw in the application, and here's where the first year GPA was. I'll be honest with you, 15 pieces of paper in an application don't sum up a human being. So sometimes we get it right, and sometimes we don't get it right. And sometimes there are things. One of the groups that's really interesting to look at is students that you would have predicted would have been the stars and don't turn out to be stars. So one of the things that I used to quietly do as my own data analysis was look at who graduated with honors. For instance, like going to a commencement ceremony, taking the program, and you would imagine those that graduated magna cum laude would be the students that you would have guessed would have graduated magna cum laude. But every once in a while, there'd be one or two students where I would say, wow, that's a student that we underestimated how much that individual was going to take advantage of what's here. So, the anecdotal, there's certainly conversations that happened between, like academic deans and the admission office. Are we thinking about students in the right way? Are we understanding some of the ways in which mental health issues might intersect with academic achievement? And there would be some of those conversations where someone would say, we're really worried about this student. And we would say, based on what we saw in the application, that's not a piece of information that we have. Or an academic dean might say, this is a student who has struggled some, but has shown a fair bit of willingness to be resilient and to take the advice that she's gotten from her academic advisor and to go for extra help and to really maximize the use of resources. And we would say, and we had that sense that that was going to happen, and that student came in some ways underprepared compared to other peers based on what was available at that individual's high school. So I think there's more anecdotal than there is sort of hard data.
Sure.
But it's fascinating.
The anecdotal does factor in past history
for sure.
and knowledge of past students in the school. Last question. So there's a very widespread perception out there that certain schools that grade tough adversely impact students' chances. I see this a lot. In fact, I'm thinking of a family I'm working with now, a couple kids in New York City. One kid is at a school that's just known for its intensity. In fact, the student got a perfect math score and didn't even test into the high-level courses. So he doesn't have that. And then another sibling's at another school that's very respected, and it's very frustrating to the family because the one student studying 4 to 6 hours, and it's really hard to get the high grades. The other student doesn't have to work nearly as hard, gets really high grades. And the thinking is that schools don't really factor that in. And boy, it would have been better to not have gone to this place and put myself in this pool with all of these super high achieving kids where I'm not going to be in the top 10% or maybe not the top 20%, maybe even not the top 30%, where I could have gone over here and been at the top of the class. And so, and the perception is that schools don't factor that in enough. What are your thoughts on that? Because I get this a lot.
Yeah, I bet you do. And, some of it is, I'll be honest with you, I think there is too much grade inflation at some schools, right? And so I think we're savvy enough to know which schools are inflating grades and which schools are deflating grades, which is why the question of what GPA do I need to get into Colorado College is so hard, right? Mm-hmm. Because I could show you students that would look like they have GPAs that wouldn't have suggested admission. And then I could show you students with GPAs that should have been, shoo-in, should have been like easy admits, and we're not. So one clue that we get on the school profile is we often get a grade distribution. Many schools don't rank anymore, and we're okay with that, right? Because the minute differences between number 1 and number 50 in a big class are just silly, right? I just saw a class rank 4 out of 17. It's like if 17 is the denominator, we should not be ranking, right? Because that's even more minute, the differences. But I think we'll be looking at, we'll have like a grade distribution, or we'll have how many A's do you give, or we'll have a scattergram or some way of seeing where the grades are. We will not name names, Mark, because we don't want to do that here, right?
Sure.
But I can think of a particular school I've read a lot of applications from where 75% of the students get A's. Mm-hmm. And so when I see 1B, what do you think my reaction is?
Bottom quarter of the class.
Right? I mean, I'm doing this weird math in my head of like, this is not going to be somebody that we would necessarily want. So I think there's ways to think about this from both lenses, right? There are those schools where grades are held to a higher standard, and we would see that on the school profile. Like I can think of, again, we won't name names, but I can think of half a dozen schools where a B is still a B in the way that the old-fashioned B, which is to say,
grade inflation became the norm.
Yes, exactly, right? And so, and I'll be honest with you, we're guilty of grade inflation on the college side. So let's not throw high schools under the bus here, because we sort of all do it, right? But I do think that if you are applying to a highly selective school where the majority of the students are not admitted, that nuance is incredibly important. That I think the public perception is we just count the number of A's and B's and make a decision, where the conversation is much more complex, right? It's okay, this is the student's academic profile, and this is what a strong student looks like in this context, which might be a mix of A's and B's, or it might be, in the case of my school where 75% get A's, it would be, this has got to be a straight A student, right? So I think there's ways that we can balance that, leaning on the school profile and the information that the school gives. But I think we're all many of us are getting into a place of being a little frustrated with the inflation more than the deflation, because the inflation
Sure.
makes everyone look like, they're at the top of their class. And there are many schools that have tried to solve that with A pluses, which I don't know what to do with an A plus, right? I mean, sometimes the A plus would signal that they've got too many A's and they're trying to distinguish among the A's. I'm good with that, but what is really the difference between an A and an A plus? And so, we have vigorous conversations when you're at a small school, when you have the privilege, as we do at Colorado College, of being able to pick and choose the students who you think will be most successful, and present the strongest profiles, not just successful, but that are going to, really be outstanding contributors to the residential and academic community. You can really engage on those topics in really meaningful ways and sort of say, this is a student at the top of the class, even though they may not look like this A plus student that we just talked about.
And I'm sure you've read by school groups. I don't know if CC does, but I'm sure you've read by yeah. Explain to our listeners what reading by school groups is, and talk about some of the insights that can give you into a school when you read by school groups.
Yeah. So it's such an interesting process, right? Because it may look as though what we're doing is just comparing one student to another. But when you read, so that what you mean by reading in a school group is that there'd be one individual on the admissions staff who is responsible for looking at all of those applicants. And one way that I like to think about it is if you have 10 applicants from this particular school, that all those decisions make sense, right? That you're looking at this slate of applicants and you're saying, okay, could I justify all the decisions we made here? Do they make sense to someone who would look at this, right? And if there are some exceptions, why, right? It could be that this is an athlete. It could be that this is a legacy, or it could be that this is a student that we're looking for particular reasons, right? There's gender differences, right?
Sure.
So many things that go into that. But I think I would want your listeners to make sure they understood that doesn't mean it's just about if you are the bottom of the class and there's 9 stronger students that apply ahead of you, that you're always denied, right? That you're denied because of other students who applied. You are admitted, denied, waitlist, deferred, any of those lovely options, right? Because of who you are. And then you're being evaluated within the context of the school group. But you're right. If we have a school that sends 20 applicants a year, I pretty much know where the bottom half of the class is. I pretty much know who the star is, right? And I also know what my institution is looking for and what my priorities are, right? As I think about that particular school group and try to defend those particular decisions, right?
And I think it's important.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, while it's great to have great distribution, increasingly I see lots of schools not doing that, sometimes intentionally not doing that.
Yeah.
And so if they don't rank and they don't give grade distribution, and sometimes intentionally so, if you're reading in school group, you can see, oh, gee, we thought that 83 was a low grade, but this teacher grade's really tough. Like,
absolutely.
Like all the kids at the top are all getting mid 80s here. And then you can factor that in. Or you can also see, wow, everybody's got a 96 through a 99 here. So we know what's going on. And so some of those things I think you can ascertain as you read in school groups, or even recommendations, right? Is the teacher saying everybody's the greatest thing since sliced bread? Or can you really see who they're really excited about when you get to see a similar rec writer write the same recommendation for multiple students?
Oh, for sure. It really gives you a sense for sort of what's happening. And I will say some schools, I was talking to a colleague who's been at this as long as I have, and we're talking about a particular school and that has stopped giving a grade distribution. And my colleague could tell you almost to the decile where that student falls based on historical knowledge, right?
Yeah.
So the school may have stopped doing that. But the other thing is the decile important? Probably not. But where is the student toward the bottom, in the middle, at the top? Where might we see this particular student? And you're right, it reveals, if you have 10 applicants, you have 10 stories about academic journeys, and you can see, is this the kind of school where only the best students take some of the most advanced classes? Or is this the student that's been someone who hasn't really thought about that sort of breadth as well as depth in the classes that they've taken. I think if I could wave a magic wand, I would want one of the best to come out of every letter of reference I've given, or I've written it to, but that I've read, right? That schools are often, this is one of the best in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. And when you see that 4 times
Right.
in one school group, you're sort
Right.
of like, really? Could those be the 4 best individuals in your 30-year career? Again, I
Right.
don't want to throw teachers under the bus.
Sure.
It's hard
But
work to teach, but you start to say, like, I'm losing a little bit of credibility
Yeah.
in this particular individual and the way they write letters.
No, I remember when I was doing admissions, I had to pick up the phone and call a particular counselor that was making everybody sound like the best they'd ever seen. And I was trying to explain to him, you're not helping, because now we
Right.
can't trust everything else that you say.
Exactly.
So, yeah,
Exactly. And you don't want to be universally distrustful, but it does make you think, like, and then when they don't say they're one of the best, does that mean they're the worst?
Sure. Yeah.
They're really, really bad at that point. So it is. That credibility piece is incredibly important.
So, Karen, this has been great. Can you give us a third week and come back and talk about Colorado College?
Oh my gosh, of course I will. That sounds like fun.
Friends, this concludes the second part of what is a 3-part interview. We hope you'll join us next week for the final part.
And now it's time for our College Spotlight of the Week.
Friends, if you never heard last week's episode, you may want to go back and check out our College Spotlight so you can have the full context. We will now resume the final part of our College Spotlight. It's going to be really interesting for me to see what some of these schools do with testing. Like, I think most of them are going to stay test optional. There's no doubt in my mind about that. They just love the talent they're attracting that they weren't attracting before. But I think some of them are going to run their own internal studies, and it's going to be important that the test optional kids are quite close or similar in their success rates.
Right.
I mean, that's what's given like Bates and Bowden the juice. Like, they have 50 and 40-year studies. And I don't know if that's always going to be the same result, because they get really good. The longer you do something, the better you get at it. And people that are just thrown into this test optional admission world are still kind of learning how to do it. So Michigan is the kind of school that it has enough stature that if their studies showed that there was discrepancy, they could pull an MIT and say we're going to require them and still probably not suffer too much in the way of applicant flow.
Right.
But they've always been a school that's been a big access school. I mean, they were furious when Ward Connerly did his thing and got affirmative action outlawed, because affirmative action has been outlawed in the state of Michigan now for some time. And Michigan has fought back as aggressively as they can within the confines of the law. And
Right.
So all the schools I talk to feel like test optional admissions is bringing in talent that they weren't getting in the applicant pool. Knowing how sort of progressive Michigan has been and how much they've been fighters for access, I would be surprised if they would kind of walk that back, because I can't see why they're not seeing what other people are seeing, which is talent from historically excluded groups that they just haven't been able to attract no matter what they've tried.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I think they really are trying to have a more diverse student population. They say their student body is notably diverse for a Midwestern state university. I think the University of Illinois at Chicago might have something to say about that, but obviously it's a different setting.
So here, I know they are. So I'll tell you something. They set up a program because I had to meet with them, and Atlanta's literally the only place that they've done this with. So many people may know this, but very few public schools are able to meet full demonstrated need. Very few, right? Virginia and North Carolina, that's basically it in the country. Michigan is not on that list. It's only been North Carolina and Virginia. That's it. And so, and for those of you who are not following what I'm talking about, when students are applying for financial aid, they have to complete financial aid forms. It does an assessment of your income and assets as to how much the formula comes back and says you're able to afford. And a school that meets full demonstrated need will ask you to pay that amount, and they'll make the rest of it up in grants and scholarships, capped federal direct student loan, and possibly campus employment or work study. Those three things. And so, but the campus employment is usually 2,000 to 3,000, and then the loan is usually 5,500. Not usually, it is 5,500 in the first year, and so the rest of it would be free money, grants and scholarships. But most schools don't have enough money to do that. So, literally, I had to attend meetings with Michigan. They established a program just with Atlanta, as it's the only market that they. I don't even know how public this is. It probably isn't that public because people are like, hey, what about me? But Atlanta, they were trying it. It's like you go through these things and you try things, and maybe they're trying it in Atlanta and then rolling it out. But Atlanta is the only market that they were trying to. They made the commitment to meet full demonstrated need for the. Now, part of it might be there's something in Atlanta called Achieve Atlanta, and anybody from Atlanta proper that has a 2.5 grade point average and goes to a school that has a graduation rate of 43% or higher, which obviously Michigan does, they get $5,000 per year. So maybe they did it with Atlanta because Atlanta kids are already coming with 20 grand.
Yeah, they got Pell, they got the 5,000.
Yes, yeah. So they said maybe we can make it work here with that 5,000, but this is APS, Atlanta Public Schools, not Metro Atlanta, which is extremely high black percentage. And I'm bringing it up just because it's all sort of part of this commitment to diversity that you were talking about, that I've seen on the ground.
Yeah. So at this point, they say that Black students make up 4% of the students' body, Latinos 6%, Asian Americans 14%, and multiracial students are 4%. They say they have large and well-organized Jewish and LGBTQ communities. I know they do very well on the Campus Pride Index, which is an indication of how LGBTQ-friendly a campus is. And
I would say this, working with a lot of Jewish students, they have an excellent reputation in the Jewish community. I mean, excellent.
Yeah.
It is very, very, very common for high-achieving Jewish students to want Michigan on their list.
Well, and I think they even have like Jewish fraternities, for instance. So, I mean, I think there's just a lot of different cultural options there. Yeah. And I guess, talking about fraternities is just sort of what is the life like at Michigan. And I think, Mark mentioned that people know how to have fun. I think about 25% of the campus goes Greek, but, Greek life does dominate a lot of the social life on the campus. There's, always parties. And that was one of the complaints, the town versus gown kind of complaints is that, the people who lived real close to the campus were really happy when it was summer and it was quiet, but, I think that it's what's seen to be one of those like work hard, play hard kind of schools. That being said, there's so many activities. You can do literally anything you want. There's, all the kinds of clubs, great study abroad, so many cultural offerings. So if that's not your scene, you can definitely find many other scenes that you could be a part of.
I mean, it's also in the Big Ten conference. And so when you're in the Big Ten, you're talking about sports at the highest level in the country.
Yes.
Right? I mean, the SEC football is the only thing really above it. And so that gives the school a little bit of a release from the places that are like academics that I would call Hopkins in that group, and Chicago is another one that, and so that adds to the fun factor. And it also draws a student that likes that. They like the fact that, 110,000 people pack Michigan football stadium, the most of any place in the country. And when you have that, you attract that, just like Duke attracts that. Yeah, because it's got that, right? And so there's that component too.
Yeah. I mean, they are Division I, as we know. Their football, the Wolverines are really big.
I have to get this in. We beat them 10 of the last 14 years. Sorry, had to get that in there. So
anywho,
sorry, Jim Harbaugh. I couldn't resist.
It's so funny because I looked forward to home football games because that's when I could go get all my errands done, and there would just be no lines in the grocery store, at the mall. I was like,
Lisa knows nothing of that world.
I never went to a game. I mean, but to be fair, the tickets were super expensive for us. There was no way I could have possibly afforded that on the teeny tiny salary I was living on at the time. But, obviously, going to games, tailgating. I have friends in Michigan, and they rent their house out on game weekends, and they go stay at a hotel, and they rent their house as an Airbnb, and they make a lot of money that way. So
they do that in Georgia here too. They make a killing in Athens.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think some people do that in Chapel Hill, but it's sort of frowned upon here. There's laws.
Sure.
Not that people don't do it, but there's laws. So, but it's not just football. They're also really strong in basketball, cross country, women's field hockey, and gymnastics. And of course, they have a ton of intramural programs that you can participate in. Apparently, they have a fantastic solar car team, which I'm guessing is a car that runs on solar power. And it has just smoked the competition for many years running. So if you're interested in that, that's a great place to go. So, I mean, there's a lot happening in Michigan, pretty much all the time. So if you want to go to sports, if you want to go, to the show, there's an archaeological and art museum on the campus. It's like really good. That's a very well rated museum, and that's free to students. So there's just a lot to do. There are a lot of great restaurants. So it's a very lively school, I would say.
Well, that's awesome, Lisa.
Oh, but I haven't gotten to the most important part, the cost.
Oh, yeah, it's up there. High 60s, isn't it? Cost of attendance out of state?
I knew that there was going to be high, but in my mind, I just didn't it was jaw dropping to me. So if you have the fortune to be an in-state resident of Michigan, you can go to the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor for around $29,000 a year. And they have really good financial aid for you. So they have something called the Go Blue guarantee. And so that means that you get free tuition if you have a family that has an income $65,000 and under and assets below $50,000. But they also have other financial aid for families earning more. And 1 out of 4 in-state graduates pay no tuition at all on this financial aid program. But if you don't live in the state of Michigan, you better get your checkbook ready, because tuition is more than 3 times what it is for in-state students. It comes in at $53,000, and you add $12,000 onto that, and then you just have a whole lot of money. My brain doesn't even want to think about the number. So, I mean, for a public school, that's a high price tag, but I guess they've got people who want to pay it, and there's not so much financial aid or merit aid for you. So you should expect, if you're going to go there, you're probably going to be mostly full freight.
Well, I knew you were doing the spotlight, so I used, for my admissions vernacular, prestige pricing, and that's what they call that. That's what they call that, prestige pricing, because there's, you have to have a good reputation, but there's a person that thinks it's even better because it's more, and the schools can use that.
Yeah.
Michigan is second only to Virginia. Virginia is the only public, school with higher pricing, and Virginia is outrageous. I mean, there are programs because they have different pricing for different majors, and Virginia has some majors like commerce that are over 80 cost of attendance out of state. And then Michigan is second, and then the UCs are third. And those 3 are at a whole different level than, and you have others that are expensive, like Washington's pretty expensive. Colorado, is pretty expensive.
Yeah, I was going to say Boulder is not exactly cheap.
They're pretty, but not like Michigan or UCs or Virginia. Virginia's like 10 or more, 10 to 15 more than Michigan.
Yeah, so you're getting into Ivy pricing at that point.
North Carolina is actually a real bargain out of state.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, you can say a lot about North Carolina, and I do, but they do have good pricing for their state universities. That's something that they have prioritized.
What's even more amazing is Florida. Mm-hmm. Florida is outrageous. Not outrageous in that sense, but like a bargain.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Lily got admitted to Florida State, and, it wasn't really that expensive, but if she did like a certain program the first year, then it would have been in-state tuition for the rest. And it was like $6,000 a year.
It is. It is.
Which
Their
was
in-state
just-
is. Yeah.
Yeah, which was crazy. I mean, it's awesome. But she just decided it was like too inconvenient to get to, basically, Florida State. No airport nearby, So, yeah, but, I will say that I worked with a student a couple of years ago for Scholar Match, and she lived in Michigan, and she applied, of course, to Michigan State and University of Michigan. And oh man, did Michigan State gap this girl something awful. Like they did not give her very much aid at all. And she basically got everything paid for at the University of Michigan.
Wow,
so, I mean, they do put their word behind that. That is true. I've seen it in action.
Awesome. Well, this is pretty thorough and comprehensive. Anything else burning on your heart you want to share?
No, I mean, I think like, if you are like a student, I've read that they say like you need to be an assertive student at Michigan because
sharp elbows. It's a sharp elbow
what?
school.
Sharp elbow school, like where you have to kind of maybe seek out help. Like there's a lot of graduate assistants. I was one of them. I found like, I don't know if it was just a psychology department, but the professors like really were disdainful a bit of the undergraduates. I won't tell you what they called them because I can't repeat it. But just imagine the worst thing you could think of calling some students, and that was it.
Lisa's told me off the air, so it's back.
But like, and I think that like I've felt always really mixed about that because on the one hand, like, I mean, of course, I was used coming out of the University of Chicago and Northwestern. And so when I graded papers, if they weren't written well, I didn't give them like the best grades. And I'm a softie, so I'm talking like a B-. But boy, did I get some pushback on that. Because they were just like, where's my A? And I'm like, well, I don't know. Why don't you do some work and then you can get one? And they did not like that response.
Well, you didn't get fired.
No, because the professors were on my side, right?
Sure.
But I just was like, well, you know what? I didn't feel like these kids were necessarily being as, I'm not going to say we were coddled at the University of Chicago because that's not the right word. I want to say like...
No, I would never say they should coddle you at Chicago.
No, not coddled, but like we were cultivated, in a certain way. Like we were,
Yeah, cultivated is better than coddled.
Yeah, they were like, you can't come out of here without a certain level of, you can't come out of freshman year without a certain level of writing. If you can't do that, then you can't be here. And, they did have a lot of support to help you do that. So it was just a different kind of thing. I think at Michigan, you can have great things. You're going to probably have to ask for it.
Yeah. And big schools like that, you're going to have some big classes. You have to be proactive in that kind of environment. You have to be, to maximize the experience and get the best out of the experience. You really have to be proactive. And I do sometimes get concerned about somebody that gets lost in that environment. Now, the good part is they're pretty academically selective, so that probably keeps the kid who's like so distracted that they can't turn their work in. That kid's probably not getting through the front door.
Right, exactly. But like again, if you're a shy kid, like you probably have to really work on going and working on your social comfort and going and asking for help and volunteering for things and showing up at things that you can, use, joining the business fraternity or, applying for the research project.
And some of those business fraternities are what lead to like the person that like those Wall Street jobs and that a lot of times makes people want to go to places like that.
Right.
Right. Like a lot of those things have professional ramifications.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, but like I said, like you can't really beat like the diversity of academic excellence the University of Michigan has. And Ann Arbor is super fun. And if you like fun, you'll find it here. And if
has
you like
nothing
sports,
on East Lansing. Have to get that in there one last time.
Yeah, and it's probably not as fun as East Lansing. You're right.
It's not.
But if you like
or is it
sports,
as pretty? The campus isn't as pretty either. But
yeah.
I've done really well. I've held back until now. I'm going to get a couple of shots in.
I actually have to agree with you because the campus at Michigan State, I like a campus where the buildings are mostly in the same style. And at Michigan, there's like a mix. And I don't know why my brain doesn't like that. Lots of people like a mix. I'm just too simplistic, I guess. So I never like walked around that campus and said, "Oh wow!" But then I was at the University of Chicago and briefly on the Northwestern campus, which are known to be quite beautiful. So I felt like it was a notch below that. So
I would agree. No, I've done well. I've held back all the way to the end.
No, I don't know.
Like,
I never went to a school that had like a rivalry.
Have you been to Michigan State? Have you been to the campus?
Yeah, I've been on the campus, and it's a beautiful school. And
really
I think,
is. Got the Red Cedar River running right through it, 2 golf courses. Really nice.
Michigan State, I think, really as an institution has a lot to offer. And in some ways, like they try harder, I think, than maybe Michigan does with their students. This is my impression from going to information sessions on both. But yeah, like this whole rivalry thing, like I don't get it.
It makes college a lot of fun. You need to get it where you live. You're Duke Chapel Hill. I mean, that's and that. I tell you what, that makes college so much fun. Like those are my memories of like the fun of college. Mm-hmm. But to each his own.
You are a competitive person, so I could totally see that's on.
And I'm also a sports addict.
You're right. So, but my kids are going to be going to school in Durham next year, and Thomas is like, "Well, I can't wear a Duke shirt. I'll get beaten up." I'm like, "No, you got to switch, pal. Like you're not like we are whatever city that we are in because we do not care. Like if whatever is expedient for this family to be, we're going to be. And if it's being Duke fans, fine. I don't care. Although I do like.
You should have been a politician, Lisa.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have to say my heart is a little bit more with the public institution because,
Sure.
It just seems like they're a little more winsome, I guess. But that's just.
No, Lisa, this was really good. And I appreciate this. We've had several requests for Michigan. And we're trying to strike the balance with these spotlights between unearthing some hidden gems, which are really important, but at the same time, acknowledging that when you see large applicant flow to a school, there's a demand and there's an intellectual curiosity about that. And we're trying to sort of strike that balance. And so Michigan falls in the category of one of the more selective ones, but happy to bring it to the people. I wish I could remember who requested it so I could acknowledge you by name, but thank you, Lisa.
Oh, my pleasure.
Friends, next week in the news, in the announcement section, I'm going to take a good solid 8 to 10 minutes, and I'm just going to go over where we're at with this test optional, test flexible, test blind, score free, test free movement. I'll also have a few other announcements about what's happening in the world of higher ed, and then we'll transition to our interview, and this is a 3-parter. It's with David Vise. I really hope everybody listens to this. I think it's extremely important that our listeners understand what CLEP courses are so that at a minimum, they can refer them to people because you can really make a lot of people happy to let them know about this unheralded opportunity that's out there. So David Vise, he's a very interesting guy. He's a Pulitzer Prize winning reporter who's worked at the Washington Post for 23 years, and he's authored 4 books. His most famous book is called The Google Story, that's been published in more than 25 languages. He's also actively involved in some other philanthropic causes, such as serving on the board of Save a Child's Heart, which provides urgent, needed pediatric heart surgery for indigent children in developing countries. He's got a real passion for the less fortunate, and I think you'll hear that in our interview. He's been an active volunteer at Martha's Table Shelter that feeds the hungry and the homeless in Washington, D.C. And he served as a volunteer at the Children's Hospital of Washington and the literacy program in Washington, D.C. schools. He's got 2 degrees from the University of Pennsylvania, the Wharton School, and he's also a senior advisor to New Mountain Capital. And so, but more importantly, he is the executive director of modernstates.org, and they teach CLEP classes completely free using top-notch professors at leading American institutions. And so I just continue to talk to Dave in this interview, and you can hear his passion, and I think you'll enjoy it. So hope to see you next week. And friends, don't forget, it's not where you go. It's not where you go. It's not where you go, but it's what you do when you get there. It's what you do when you get out of there. See you next week, everybody. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 14. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel, and to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stylianos Dimitriou. If you want to have a coaching session with Lisa or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcast. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Thursday.